So, welcome to another show. So, today we have Gerald Schoenewolf on, and we're here to discuss the issues with guns in America and whether or not it is a cultural issue or whether or not it is the accessibility to guns. Gerald is an author and a psychoanalyst. So, welcome to today's show, Gerald.
Thank you for having me.
So, which of those do you think is the issue? Do you think it's the accessibility to guns or the culture that's the issue?
I definitely think it's the culture. You know, I have I did a lot of research when I was writing my book, The Mass Killer, Six Case Histories that tell us why. There's a lot of there have been a lot of people who every time there's a mass killing, and it seems like there's one every other week in America, there are a lot of people who quickly say it's the accessibility of guns. But we've had guns in America since the beginning of this country, which is a very young country. Um, and but mass killings have been happening in the last 3 or 4 decades. And so the reason they've been happening in the last 3 or 4 decades is because I think our culture has become uh, sick in the last 4 decades.
So what do you mean by sick? Is it the general degeneracy of society? Is it the increase in pagan sort of behaviors and the demise of religion and ethics and values? Or is it something else? Now, I just want to put a caveat onto this as well. Is you mentioned that it's not the accessibility to guns. Now, I'm not saying it is or I'm not saying it isn't, but with that, as with any sort of experiment, you would have something of similar nature to compare it to. So, for example, let's say the UK had guns and we both had guns, the UK and the USA, you could then, because that is a consistent measure within that analysis, you could then compare the cultural differences. So, is there anywhere really that you could compare the accessibility to with regards to America and obviously the Second Amendment?
Yeah, well, I didn't do any comparison studies with other countries, but I did find out that there are twice as many mass killings in America than there are in any other country in the world. Um, so why? Why are there twice as many mass killings? Guns are accessible in other countries. I don't know what the laws are in the UK, but they're available in other countries too. But
Yeah.
yet America has twice as many mass killings. So that kind of speaks for the evidence that it's not the accessibility of guns, but also, as I said before, guns have always been accessible in America, always. But only in the last 3 decades have mass killings mushroomed in the United States.
But is there then two issues? Is it that number one could be the accessibility of guns that could be a small increase against other nations, and then secondly, it's the culture that has caused the large recent increase in gun in mass deaths. So, for example, and this alludes to your point, I suppose. I think it's I don't know if you'll maybe be able to correct me if I'm wrong, but is Chicago the number one for gun issues, and it's illegal to own a gun in Chicago.
Yeah, so what does that tell us, right? I think Chicago has a violent culture. There's more murders there, I think, than any other city in the United States. Uh, but in my book, I'm a psychoanalyst, and I concentrated on the psychological aspect of this, and that's a more complicated thing than looking at the number of guns. That's a simple explanation, but looking at the psychology of what has been happening to our culture, what's been happening to families in the United States, that's a more complicated thing. Um,
So what has happened then? So from your conclusions and obviously your book, what have you found? You mentioned family there. Is it the breakup of the nuclear family that's caused this? Is it the increase in homosexuality? Is it the demise in family values? Is it the increase in materialism? Is it the increase of status requirements? Is it the decrease of compassion and
Well, it
gratitude?
might,
Is it all of those things?
all of those things are combined in that, I think that, right now, over one third of American families are one parent families, generally, female centered families. And that statistic is rising. Uh, so that's not good if there are no fathers present. Uh, the families these days, because of the feminist movement, families emphasize they favor girl children and they disfavor boy children. And as a result of that, boys are lagging. They're lagging in high school. They're lagging behind in college. Girls now outnumber boys in undergraduate programs. They outnumber boys in college programs. There are more female managers than boys. Uh, you know, Women are being favored. If you look at TV, you find more women anchors than male
Yeah,
anchors.
I think
Uh,
this is a secondary issue, or this is a fundamental societal issue, though, isn't it? That the the male patriarchal model, the masculine model, is being seen as to be a bad thing, to be a strong male who runs a family that is, builds up a family, and it comes down to many issues for me. So, in even I think they use alimony as the term in the United States. If a man gets a female pregnant and they split up, then alimony is paid to the woman. So what they are basically saying that it's the man's problem always that a child is born and not the woman's problem. Yet the woman gets freedom of choice for her body by murdering a child in an abortion.
yes, exactly. All the laws, especially since the feminist movement began in the last 100 years of feminism, there have been passed hundreds of new laws favoring women.
Yeah,
Uh, and people have not really been paying attention to what's been happening. Uh, and then now, in recent times, laws have been passed favoring transgender people. And in Canada, as you probably know, they passed a law where a person can be fined up to $2,000 for using the wrong pronoun when they address a transgender person.
but the
Uh,
thing is, this all of this points towards, for me anyway, the the removal of strong father figures. Because if you look at the stats, even in the United States, the majority of men that are in prison are from single female households, mother households, not from single male households. Because when they are from single male households, you have a strong father figure to help bring you up, and it's just the way that it is. Unfortunately, when you have a mother, and no one's discrediting the work a mother does, but you do need a male figure there to emulate and to build discipline from, which you just don't get from a female in charge,
no,
unfortunately.
you don't.
And
Males are,
so I go
yeah,
on.
it's males are very necessary for families, and that's something that we have discovered. It's in this rush to discredit males by the feminists and so forth, and toxic masculinity and all of that stuff. Uh, what we overlooked was that, hey, what about toxic femininity? Feminism itself, it has been quite toxic to Western culture. And we need to stand back and take a look at what has been happening. And so
Absolutely.
most of the mass murderers are white males. And I think they have been harmed by what's happening not only in families but in our divisive culture in the United States. This when you have a divided culture, like if you have a divided family where the husband and wife is always fighting, that affects the children very much. Uh, and when you have a divided culture, that affects each citizen who lives in that culture. It's a very restless culture.
Yeah.
Uh, and there's no one single value system anymore uniting the culture. And so the culture is at war, and so every individual is at war. Uh, White males who grow up in this culture have no one to turn to, no one's listening to them. So they situation where they have a traumatic childhood. Uh, they don't have the kind of family integrity that would help them out. And
Yeah.
then they grow up in this kind of traumatic situation in the family. Then they go into a traumatic situation in culture, which reinforces the trauma that was done in the family. And
It's the dysfunctional nature, though, isn't it, of society in general? And the way that nowadays, especially with smartphones, and the fact that males and females both go to work, no family values can be instilled rather, into the youth of today. And therefore, the state essentially brings up the children in a way that encourages transgender, encourages all these other behaviors. So, for example, if I chop my arm off, you're probably going to call me a little bit mental, a little bit nuts. But if I chop my reproductive organ off, I'm seen as a hero.
exactly the values that are happening now are splintered, and the these movements like the feminist movement and the gay movement and now the transgender movement, they're fighting. Whoever has the squeaky wheel gets the worm, right? And these movements are the squeaky wheels of society. And the transgender movement is loud and pushy, and so everybody is intimidated. The gay movement was loud and pushy. The black movement was loud and pushy. The women's movement was loud and pushy. Whoever is the pushiest and the loudest, everybody has to listen to them, and their values are adopted, whether they're scientifically accurate or not. And so people are like getting operations now to remove their genitals and change to another gender, and then they later regret it. They're
Yeah.
in the rush of this hysteria that's encouraging them to do all this before, even before the age of 2 or 3. They're encouraged to do it,
Yeah, exactly.
and they don't have an ego that's strong enough yet to think for themselves. But they're encouraged to think that they can think for themselves even at that age.
Yeah, I mean,
And
as a kid, people wanted to be unicorns. They wanted to be superheroes. I mean, even up to the age of 21, you don't really know what you want to be in life. You don't know if you want to be a doctor or an accountant or a sportsman, whatever it's going to be. So again, as you said, the fact that they're pushing this is a question in itself. But there's really more to it than that, though, isn't there? There's a question of, well, why is this being forced? Number one, and two, what are the other issues? Not just the sexual side of things, because that's just one side. What are the other selfish based philosophies that people have? Hedonism, as opposed to like utilitarianism on the whole, for example, a sense of community and giving to people. It's always about take, take, take. It's a question for me, how do we change those things? Because I think the sexual sides and all of that is secondary. How can we, instead of segregating people, bring people together? We are all human beings. Don't label people as white male, black male, female, this, that. We're all individuals and we're all trying to get to the same goal. We got to this point throughout history with traditional values, traditional roles, traditional thought processes, working hard, not through Instagram models and not through Instagram influences. This is how we got to that point. But then you could ask a secondary question or tertiary question to that. Is it the case of hard times create strong men create good times, and good times create weak men. Is that where we are today in the West?
Well, yeah, I think the worst people are being listened to because they're shouting the loudest. I do believe that we're in the last stage of decadence, or at least the middle of it right now. Okay, so what can we do? What can we do, you ask, to unify uh, culture again? Well, I have about three or four ideas about that in the book. One of them is I would have, if I were in the government or the president or whatever, I would have biweekly town halls. I would have biweekly national town halls where all people from all walks of life could express themselves. We would have representative people come to these town halls every 2 weeks, and they would be encouraged to express their opinions, and they would all come from a different place, of course. And the rules would very strongly discourage anyone from trying to shout down anyone or talk over anyone the way people have been doing now on panels or on television. No one would be able, if they started shouting somebody down or talking over them, they would be asked to leave the forum.
Okay.
So everyone would be able to express their views in an equal way. And I think this would bring about unity because in this forum, everyone would be equal. Conservatives, liberals, in-betweens, college professors, blue collar workers, they would all have the same right to express their opinions. And I think this would cut through the bullshit.
Okay.
And
But isn't that fairly idealistic though? Because aren't you going to have the same issue with political correctness undertones? That if someone says something that they feel strongly about and it's voiced and it's something that's very public, and then I mean, we've seen it, haven't we? Where people have been sacked for saying something on Twitter, of all things, and they've been sacked for it.
no, but that wouldn't
To
happen.
remove, like I know, Dana White, the UFC president, was asked to remove his support for Donald Trump by his sponsors. Isn't now because of the political correctness that we have, and because of this, this is how you should live. This is the wokeness that you should embody. Isn't that going to cause the same issue with your sort of solution to this problem?
Town hall. No, because wokeness would not prevail in the town hall. In the town hall, it would be free speech and it would be moderated by people trained not to allow anybody to try to dominate the proceedings. No matter whether they're politically correct or conservative or whatever their leaning is, they would not be able to dominate the proceedings. No value system would dominate the proceedings.
But what about if integrity was questionable? What if people had been paid off to then be part of this agenda? How would you combat that? Because that is something that does exist in today's day and age.
There would be no agenda. This is free speech. Everyone would be free to say whatever their point of view is. Nobody would be censored because they were politically incorrect or not woke or anything like that. It's just everyone speaks. And that climate in which everyone's point of view is equal would I think encourage unity. Because once everybody's equal and everybody sees, people who would be trying to act like their view is more important than anybody else's view, that would become evident in such a town hall.
But the problem is though, is that if you speak to most people down the pub or at a bar or your friendship circles, they agree with the sentiment that most men and most people in general would agree with. The problem is that if you mention free speech, is free speech even really a thing anymore? In reality,
it would be on this town hall. Okay, I'm talking in idealistic terms.
Yeah, idealistic terms. Okay,
I understand that it seems like that's impossible in today's day and age, but Okay, that's one of my ideas. Then the another idea is to with regard to political groups. I would have the government would political groups like the Black rights group, the feminist group, the transgender group, they would have to register with the government. We cannot let political groups take over a culture.
But aren't every group political groups? Aren't Caucasian groups political groups? Aren't Asian groups political groups?
All political groups would have to register with the government, regardless of whether they were Asian, black, white, uh, women, men. They would all have to register with the government and follow certain rules.
But again, doesn't that segregate people and put them as part of this is how I acknowledge myself. This is how I represent myself, as opposed to everyone's an individual and everyone's part of a collective. Because is it an anarchist who doesn't believe in having a government? Do you
Yeah.
believe that we should still have governments, or do you believe that we don't need governments anymore as part of this? Register your group and work in a maybe utilitarian way that everyone should be, or you should make everyone as happy as they possibly can be to the best
No,
extent possible.
if of course, if people, every group has to register with the government, then you're making the government stronger. That's the whole point. You're making the government stronger, and you're taking away the power of these political groups that all want to. They want the reason anyone goes to a political group is for power. That's the only reason they do it. People, there have been studies, the True Believer studies, which indicate that people join political groups because they feel powerless in their individual lives. They're not actualized in their individual lives. So
Okay.
they join political movements, and they can immediately feel powerful, and
Okay.
they can act out their anger. And so the government needs to be in control of those groups, not the groups being in control of the government.
Okay. So what about this then? So governments, we elect them, don't we? So we elect governments, yet they monitor us. Should we not be monitoring those who we've elected?
Well, we do that at the polls, at the political elections. We elect them. And if they don't do well, then we cannot elect them again.
But we don't monitor them enough really to make a sound judgment, do we? Whereas they monitor everything we do, how much tax we pay, what we do on our phones, what we search for. Uh, you know, I mean, China, for example, they've got the social credit scoring, but we don't do that with those in charge. Surely, if we elect them, and should we monitor them more, really, and the agendas that they're trying to put on us?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Some people say in America, for example, that the people who are elected to office don't really run anything anyway.
The shadow governments.
The shadow that the CIA actually, and rich corporations actually run things,
Yeah,
and
certain families.
that the president of the United States is really just a puppet government. So it's a
Okay.
complicated question.
Yeah, so okay, so coming back to some of your solutions then. So what other solutions do you have? I think you said three so far. What other solutions do you have
I
to
said
try and
to
fix the gun and crime within the United
Oh,
States?
okay. Another one is about families. I think that families need to be strengthened, and I think that you know when the quality of parenting has become very bad. So in order to improve that, I think parents should have to be licensed. You should have to be licensed before you can be a parent. I mean, for God's sakes, you have to be licensed to be a barber. You have to have a license to go fishing.
Okay, so okay, let's put a spanner in the works here though. Who then specifies how you generate that license? Because as you said in Canada, they're encouraging parents to transgender their kids, and if they don't let them, they take the kids off them. Isn't that then a bad thing that you have to have a license to be a parent on the basis that they will make you conform to bad and degenerate behaviors. Like for me, for example, one of the biggest changes they made in the past that has caused real issues with today's society is that you're no longer allowed to hit children when that is discipline and that is essentially helping them to change. As soon as you took that away and took away caning in schools, look how undisciplined kids are. Is that what you mean? Do you mean an idealistic set of standards that parents need to conform to in order to ensure a future generation of those that are morally and ethically healthy, let's say?
Well, that's two different matters. One is parent training, and the other is just licensing parents. Now, the first part, licensing parents, it's like uh, you have to get a hunting license. Why? Because we want to make sure that the people we're giving the license to hunt are not psychopathic. You know. So the reason you give a parenting license is the same thing. You want to make sure the parents are not psychopathic. You want to make sure they're not schizophrenic. You want to make sure they're not borderline or you know some severe kind of neurosis that would impair them as far as being able to be good parents. It's just a basic weeding out process. You want parents that are basically sane and sound and can raise healthy children.
But isn't that going to then go down the path of eugenics, much like Adolf Hitler and many others have tried to do?
Yeah, well, everybody, whenever you talk about these things, people always go to the extreme. Oh, well, if you start registering parents, that means that you're mind control or something like that, you know? No, if you license barbers, does that mean that then no nobody's going to be a barber anymore because you're starting to license them?
But
I
yeah,
mean,
cutting hair is very different to eugenics in that.
cutting hair is a simple thing, whereas raising a child is the most complicated thing that anybody can do. And we're going to just let them, anybody who wants to do it?
Yeah, it's a right though, isn't it, to have
No,
to
it's not a right. What makes it a right? What makes that a right?
what makes it not a right?
Because we have to do something about the increase of mental illness in society. We got to do something about it.
But is mental illness just down to genetic factors or is it cultural factors as well?
Well, we can't control genetics, but we can control cultural.
We can control genetics actually by selective breeding,
Well, okay.
which is
Yeah.
eugenics basically.
Yeah.
And it's saying, oh, if you wanted the highest IQ, tallest individual,
We're
you
not doing
breed
that.
certain scientists. But no, but again, if you come
What
back
I'm
to
saying.
parenting and saying, well, if someone's schizophrenic, they can't have children. I know what you're saying. You're trying to get rid of those inherent diseases, but then how far do you go? Do you look at secondary carrier genes rather than just primary genes? Because generally, if someone has a disease, it's from two carriers that have created a tertiary baby that has that inherent disorder. Then do you go down the Down syndrome route and look at the chromosomes, etc.? How far do you go with this idea?
Yeah. Well, we're also talking about, nature versus nurture. There's been a historical argument whether nature or nurture is responsible for personality formation. Okay, I come down in favor of nurture. I believe that nurture is by and far the thing. How one is treated, how one is parented. That's by far what creates personality. I don't think genetics is involved in personality formation. So therefore, I believe that if we need to have some standards about how we parent people. That's really a crucial thing as far as being able to restore sanity to culture.
Could we not fix this in the schools though
Well,
by
I, I,
teaching people basic things like instead of spending time learning about gender studies and spending time learning about wokeism and all this rubbish, go back to old school, learn how to do a good job, learn how to have pride in your work, learn how to care for others and not be selfish. I mean, school, for example, for me, has so many bad things. It teaches you to not question authority. It teaches you not to work in groups because that's cheating. All of these things make you failure is bad as well. If you fail, it's bad. All these things actually teach you to be bad in life and not good. We should learn how to work together. We should actually question authority. We should understand that failure is part of the process. The more we fail, the more we succeed in the long term. We need to encourage these behaviors at a young age, because the problem is now they don't even let you give out medals for kids who win, because it's seen as bad for the kids that lose. We need to bring back that competitive nature. We need to bring back masculinity, especially for the boys, of course. We need to bring back discipline, a lot of these things, because actually, even if we do those changes today, as you said, it's going to take 20, 30 years for that actually to build a society and a generation. And the speed that we're going down this rabbit hole is so fast. We don't want to get to a point where it's irrecoverable, where it's idiots raising idiots. And, we have AI doing everything. We have robots doing everything. We can't even drive anymore. We can't even clean up anymore. We can't even cook anymore. It's all done for us. And we then lose capabilities cognitively. And then we have children that then lose cognitive ability, and it's a cycle that diminishes. And then you're at a point in 20, 30 years time when we've got less population, the infrastructure is just eroding and crashing, and then we're a civilization that goes to nothingness.
Yeah, well, education is another subject, and I think that you're absolutely right. We got to eliminate propaganda teaching from our educational systems, and we have to start teaching the basics again. But I think that one important thing should be added, and that is, I think everybody should go through a form of psychotherapy as part of their formal education in school. It could start even in elementary. People don't learn how to live. They learn how to use math and writing and history, but they don't learn how to live. And psychotherapy would be a course that would help you to know yourself and to learn how to live. I
Yeah,
think
definitely.
added to the curriculum.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. I think introspection, psychology, your own psychology, philosophy, understanding how to ask questions, how ethics works, how metaphysics works, all of these sorts of things, and actually how a healthy society should work. If you ask a 4-year-old, should people steal or should people help each other? They would say people should help each other. Yet why don't you behave like that? Again,
True.
is it the Instagram culture of the rat race that's causing you to do that? Is it? I mean, you see these videos like where people have basically ripped people off. They've bought something from a Target or wherever, sold it online for triple the price and made a profit, and people love it. They go, "Oh my God, you're so clever. You're such a businessman." Actually, you've basically shafted some people. So, I mean, capitalism, I think, is still the best system, but for some people, and very small parts of capitalism cause real issue for people. Um, and that's probably a whole separate conversation anyway as to what I think economically should be the way forward. But I think there's as you've spoken about education, the family, there's problems in all areas of what makes up a life, and it's I mean I agree with you. I think it's all of those areas that create an increase in crime and degeneracy, etc. But I do still think that the increased accessibility to guns in America does have an impact, because you can carry weapons. And I agree with the Second Amendment in respect of tyrannical governments. But I'm still with you though in terms of education does and is important, because if you gave Zen Buddhists all guns, they still wouldn't shoot each other.
Oh yeah, Buddhism is one of the most, all religions have caused wars. Most of the wars that have been fought in the history of the world have been fought on behalf of a religion. But the Buddhist religion is the only religion. I think maybe there was only one war in all of history that was fought on behalf of Buddhism, and that was a form of Buddhism that was a big, a severe offshoot of what Buddhism actually is.
Exactly, exactly. So I mean, it's all comes down to the individuals. You can put a Ferrari in the hands of Michael Schumacher, and it will drive really well. You put the same Ferrari in the hands of a 4-year-old, and that 4-year-old's dead. So it's a combination of the weapons available and the individual using them, and I think that's what the whole argument is about, isn't it? Is it the weapons? Is it the individual and the society, or is it a combination of both? That's caused a massive issue. So, in terms of your book, then, where can people get hold of your book and read about your solutions for current world events or current world problems, should I say?
Okay, my book is available on at Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and probably other places that I don't know about, but those two places for sure. You can get it in paper or in Kindle or the ebook. Um,
Fantastic. And if anyone wants to reach out to you and maybe get a bit more insight into your thought process, can they reach out to you somewhere as well? Or
well, I have some websites. One is themaskiller dot com, themaskiller.com. You can find out much more about this book and the reviews it's gotten. I have a psychology website called drschoenewolf.com. And I have my own publishing company where I publish my own books through Amazon, and that company is called the Living Center Press.us. So you can reach me through those three places in particular.
fantastic. Well, we'll put those on the notes for the show. Is there any final comments that you want to mention? Maybe some of the a solution that we've maybe missed, or any final points about anyone who's listening about how they can help to change the world?
Well, I think I would just encourage people to read my book. It's a very readable book. People tell me they can't put it down because it focuses on 6 case histories of the most famous mass killers. So you get to know these mass killers firsthand and to see how they developed, how their personality. I go very back into their early childhood to show how each of their personalities developed and how it kept being at odds with society. So I would just urge people to read the book because I think once you read it, you'll have a different understanding. These mass killers are tragic figures. They just didn't get what they needed in a sick society.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you with you mentioned the psychoanalysis. I think that's something that should be in schools and in workplaces, employed by states to constantly look at where the psychology of individuals are, because you can start to see habits that develop that people start shooting off the rails. And if you don't nip that in the bud sooner rather than later, that's where issues can arise. Let's say someone does turn into a mass murderer and they murder 4, 5 people. The families that are affected can then go into psychological issues themselves, and then they can pass that on. And it's something that massively spreads. So yeah, I'm definitely with that. As I said, we'll put everything in the show notes. And thank you very much, Gerald, for being on the show and talking about something that's so close to your heart.
Thank you for having me and for having such a lively conversation about it.
Fantastic, Gerald. Have a great day.
You too.